Welcome to Beyond Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Petralis, and we are so excited for our guest today. But before we get to our guests, I just want to give a little bit of an announcement here. We have a huge announcement coming for the show this Thursday on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. We're going to be releasing a huge announcement for the show, something that we're really excited about with one of our sponsors, and we'll be telling you a lot more about it. So just keep your eyes and your ears open and pay attention to our social media because, as I said, Thursday, we have a big announcement coming forward, and I can't wait to share it. And with that being said, I want to jump back to our guest. A coach that is extremely well established, has coached at all three levels, at the college level, the high school level, and even at the youth level for significant amounts of time. Somebody who I'm honored to have on the show, and I think we'll have an incredible conversation. Just to read the resume of this coach and where they've been a little bit. They've been an assistant coach at basketball at UMass Dartmouth, the head basketball coach at Bridgewater State, an assistant coach in Taunton High School, the head coach of Ashland High School, the head coach of King Philip High School, and currently the head coach of Holliston High School. So quite a resume, quite a basketball background, and we're really excited to have him on today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Champagne.
It's great to be here, Anthony. I love what you're doing, and some of the people you've had on I really respect, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. As I said, we're just really excited. I know just from our pre-phone conversation a little bit, it'll definitely be a treat for the listeners today for sure. So this is a question that I typically ask everybody, but with you, I'm just really interested because you've been at all three levels a little bit. Just talk about your tenure into starting the coach. Like, when did you know that being a coach was something in your deck of cards, and that you saw yourself pursuing as a future in your life?
Well, I was totally enthralled in the game of basketball as a high school kid, and then I went to Mass Bay first, and then to SMU, which is now UMass Dartmouth. And the coach there, Bruce Wheeler, was a very patient man with me as an immature young guy, and he welcomed me in to be his assistant. And I just really dove in. Bruce was very generous with empowering me to get involved with making practices. I mean, he's one of my favorite people looking back as I got older. I've actually drifted back to becoming good friends with Bruce. But he really gave me a lot of rope to get involved in practice. It was difficult coaching kids you had played with the year earlier. So for 2 years, I had kids that I played with coaching. I mean, we were all kids. And I was 21 years old and very much full of myself and was probably never wrong then. So it was really interesting. And as you get older, you look back at it, you reconnect with some of those guys and you laugh about some of the stuff you did in life. Maybe we'll talk about it later. It was a lot different coaching then, and it was a lot more free reign. And, the reins have been pulled in on coaches a great deal. Some good, some bad.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think, and I want to allude to something you said later, and we'll talk about this throughout the entire episode, but a head coach having the patience with a young coach, right? Like, you're close to age with some of these guys that you played with, or they that are playing. But having patience with young coaches and really teaching them the way is something that is so important. And every coach that I've had on here this year has talked about that, the importance of grooming young coaches. When I coach football, I know our head coach was grooming us to move up from freshman to JV to varsity, from positional to coordinator. I mean, that's what you do. And so it's cool that, you experienced that young, and you brought that up because I know as you probably go out throughout your tenure and we talk about the spots that you've been in, you've done the same thing. Now, one thing I love is you coaching at the college level. I know you were at UMass Dartmouth as an assistant, but eventually you became the head basketball coach at Bridgewater State. And I think you held that position for about 9 or 10 years. What I love about that is, and I just love jumping into college coaches and asking them this question, is talk about the recruiting. Bringing kids in. I mean, I know you coached there in like the 80s into the 90s. So technology wise, having access to film, things like that weren't available then. So talk about how you went about recruiting, not only from a program standpoint, but maybe just regionally. Like, how far was far for you guys to reach out to?
Well, it wasn't far. We were pretty much New England as a state college. Most of there's schools in New England that offer whatever the needs are of that area. So we would mostly recruit local, but it was so different. You would come in the morning and type your letters to send to kids. And you would try to call. There wasn't as much restrictions then on calling, especially in Division III. I mean, even back then, you would bring notes in for scholarship level kids when you go in the locker room after a game, because D3 coaches could go in the locker room. Other coaches couldn't at times. But it was really, there was a lot of camaraderie. The kids are kids. They're the same now as they ever were when I was a kid. There's really no difference. The cultures are different, and it comes out a little differently. But recruiting was a grind. I mean, now you can do a lot on your phone with kids recruiting, whereas you actually physically had to be there. So you would get in a car and drive to different places, and sometimes go with other coaches that were also recruiting the same kids. I used to go with the Stonehill coach who was recruiting scholarship level kids, but he would take me along with him because, you didn't get paid. I think I got $300 coaching at the college level my first 3 years, and I was so happy. I had a key to the gym. There was a pool in the gym. Life was pretty good.
Yeah.
But it was really fun, and you'd go to a lot of summer league games. There wasn't a lot of AAU. There were like 2 or 3 AAU groups. I think Jack McMahon had a popular group, and Leo Papil, who's BABC, still, Leo was just starting out with a lot of that stuff. So there's only 2 or 3, and those were the best kids. So coaching Division III, you would go to practices, you would go to a game and try to engage with at Cambridge Ridge and Latin. When Pat Ewing was there, we weren't recruiting Pat, but we were recruiting maybe the 10th player on the team, and we would go to practice, and they could play because they didn't go to prep schools like they do now. So the public schools had very good players, and a lot of times in those big schools, the 8th, 9th, and 10th players were pretty good.
Right.
So it was different.
Yeah, and I would say, especially when you bring up the Cambridge Ridge and Latin, I mean, those teams were loaded. I mean, with Pat Ewing or without Pat Ewing, those teams were loaded.
Yep.
So, like you said, yeah, some of these guys might be sitting on the bench and being the 6th or 7th guy off the bench that's starting at 75% of other high schools, but they're just on a team that's pretty loaded. So it's interesting to hear how recruiting was so different back then. And like you said, now it's just instant access. You want someone's film, you want to look somebody up, you go on YouTube, you have, I know football, we have Huddle, like you can find people very, very, very easily. And so with that being said, just along with the recruiting, what type of player or kid are you looking for? Like, not even necessarily the X's and O's of the game of how well they can play the game, but personality wise, like how did you kind of figure out whether you really wanted someone in your program to represent the best for Bridgewater State?
Well, and schools are different, with admissions, they're different. With our city schools are different than suburb schools. And I think back then we had a lot of our admissions director, Jim Plotner of Bridgewater, used to always say, I'm not going to set a kid up to fail. So he wasn't going to welcome in a kid that he didn't think could academically make it, and which was just bad for everybody. I mean, I can remember recruiting a guy who was a very good player at Boston Tech, or no, he was at Bridgewater State the year I got there, and he didn't make it through the first semester. Well, he had only been in the shop program at Boston Tech, because in those days they had different floors for college prep, was the top floor and so on. So you learn that, you had to really get to know the kids, because we didn't have a scholarship to hold the kids. If they didn't make the grade point average, they were not going to be allowed to continue. So you really had to get to know the kid and try to get him to be invested in college, not just basketball. And then all the help started coming in admissions. There were programs on campus for kids for more academic support. Learning disability help was just starting in the 80s, which now everybody finds normal. But that, I was there from 83 to 92 for those 10 years. And even that, we used to advocate for those kids. By the time I left Bridgewater, they had those people full time there to help the kids. So it changed a lot.
And obviously during your tenure there as well, I mean, you're recruiting. I mean, I always think the cool part about college, you're recruiting people for 4 years. You're recruiting them. I mean, things are different now. People transfer all the time and leave schools and go to another school. But back then, I mean, you're recruiting someone for a 4-year window. you have a real impact on their lives. I mean, they're trusting you and choosing you to go to a school because they feel like you're going to put them in the best position, not only basketball wise, but also life wise, being a leader, being a man, amongst young men, trying to show them that way. So, I always find that recruiting aspect of it so interesting from sport to sport. Like I said, I know the football world pretty well. So to hear, basketball and how coaches look into that, I always find that pretty fascinating for sure.
Yeah.
And when you go ahead.
The kids, one of the fun things about coaching at Bridgewater was because it was a teacher's college.
Yeah.
A lot of those kids got into coaching. So you really did have an influence. And we scrimmage now, two of my ex-players teams, and it's wonderful, to talk about the way it was, kind of like you and I are, except they're telling me how bad or good certain things were when I was coaching them,
Now,
so
how
it's
often do you run into that you actually coach the kid
lot.
that you've got against? A lot? Yeah.
A lot. There's probably 16, 17 kids that were at Bridgewater State that now coach high school. So it's really fun. And even being a father of an 18-year-old now, their kids are all older than mine too. So I learn from them just as much. It works both ways with kids and with coaches. You can learn something from everyone.
That's awesome. No, I think that's really cool. I mean, I still keep in touch with a lot of my ex-players, and yeah, I've never gone against any of them. That would have been something that would have been really cool. But, just to kind of see a lot of them in the coaching world or involved in programs that you maybe once faced, it is fun to see.
It's the best part of sports is those relationships that you see come full circle. And you actually get to see, if you coach long enough, you get to see the circle of life within the coaching industry. So it's really a lot of fun. One of my favorite people is Jimmy O'Brien, who coached at BC and Ohio State, and his daughter is now coaching. And I love sitting down with Amy and listening to her talk. She's going to be a great coach. And it's just funny. You can see her father's coaching in her.
Imagine how much knowledge she pulls from her dad, like throughout her life with that, like, especially if she's in it and doing it, that means she had an interest of it when she was younger. So
Loved it.
what a mind. Yeah. What a mind she must have of her dad coaching, two big programs. I mean, big schools, big programs. And that's cool.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And he's the best. And I wish I had, like, for her, that was a father and a mentor, and it would have done me good at my young, cocky age of coaching to have someone like that to kind of whack me on the back of the head and say, hey, take a deep breath, look at it this way. And that's what you do as you get older. You look at it from more sides.
Yeah. And what I find really interesting about you, and what I really can't wait to kind of pick your brain about, and if I'm a little inaccurate here, correct me, but after you coached at Bridgewater, you took a little bit of time off, right, from the coaching world itself, and you begin to coach youth. Now, a lot of that had to do with the fact that you're a dad and you're coaching a kid, and being involved in the youth programs was something that was valuable. And you and I had that talk about being a dad. I mean, the pre-phone interview the other night, I was a little late because I took my kids out to the splash park, and I was like, hey, I need like an extra 15 minutes if that's okay, just get them settled in. So talk about, I mean, I'll ask this question over like a 20, 25-year window, I guess, or maybe a 10, 15-year window. We'll make it less. What's the biggest thing that you've noticed has changed about youth sports today that was maybe different when you were involved in youth sports back then? And it could be something really positive. It could be something that, you're critiquing a little bit, but what's that big difference that you see?
I think it's the expectation level that parents put on their kids. And I think it's because of whether it's they're more invested literally driving everywhere, monetarily, but the expectation of how good that child is going to be in the sport versus, I'm so glad my kid is playing sports, staying out of trouble, physically taking care of himself, and being with friends. Now it's more about, I got to find a place so he can get a scholarship. And it's not everyone, and maybe it's just a loud minority a lot of times, but they do take up a lot of the time. And they also influence the environment a lot. So I think the biggest difference is, I never remember my mother saying a word about youth sport, Little League, all that. But now they have all these youth sports for money, and it puts a lot of pressure on people. And I think the parents, we worry about our kids and we worry about our dollars at home and paying our bills. And now the two have collided, where I think sports used to be the good place for the kid to go while we as parents were parents and the kids could just be kids. Now the two intertwine, and I think it can create a great conflict. And some people do a wonderful job with it, but it's very difficult whenever you bring money into it. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think, that's the one thing with AAU, right? There's so many different leagues out there now and so many different teams that you can play on. And like you said, there is a lot of good. I'm not saying that all AAU is not good. It's far from what I'm saying. But I
Some
think, like
great
you
people.
said, when people pay money, there's sometimes the kids are given expectations or told, oh, you're a Division I player, you're a Division II player, because they're
Right,
paying a lot of money and that's what their parents want to hear. But when they play the high school game, it's a little bit different, because your high school coach is trying to put a roster together for the team to win the league, to go to states, everything else, and they're not necessarily being like, oh, this is a Division I player, we have to play this kid, or this kid's a Division II
right.
player, we have to play this kid. So I think I agree with you. I think those expectations sometimes that parents set for their kids, the bars are high. The bars are extremely high, and I get it. In life, the bars are high too. But like you said, as a young kid, you fall in love with the game. You fall in
Yeah,
love with playing the game. And the last thing you want is a kid not to fall in love with something because they feel like it's just a chore, or that somebody's making them to do it more than they really want to do it. And I think that that's what I've noticed.
Anthony,
That's what
it's
I see.
amazing how many kids go to college, good players, and end up not playing more than a year. And I think they are burned out. Whereas for us, we were just playing like goofy kids and wait for the ice cream truck to come. Or, you hung out at the courts because it was a safe place and your parents were happy you were there. Now, I mean, COVID, at least the kids were playing outdoors for the first time in 30 years. So that
Yeah.
was good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's really very interesting culturally. Like you said, some of the AAU people, my son had a great experience in club lacrosse, but you got to pick and choose. And by the time it's done, that's when it's too late, right?
Right.
So if you cross paths with the right people, there's a lot of luck in that too. But there are some very good people. I know a couple of my guys are involved with one of the groups from up your way, and they do a really nice job teaching.
Yeah.
And there isn't as much teaching in youth sports anymore because they have to get on and off the court at a certain time. It's a lot different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just interested because obviously you've been at all three levels, and then you obviously were at youth sports for such a long time before you returned back to the high school game. So I was just interested to see how much you saw carry over from what you notice is maybe not necessarily wrong with youth sports today, but something that is concerning about youth sports
The
today,
challenge.
and seeing, yeah, challenging, perfect word. And then seeing it how, these kids get older now and they're playing in those high school games. So, you
Yeah.
took some time off, but then you came back, and just like my guest last week, Bob Omita from Stoneham, it seems like you do a pretty good job of building programs up and rebuilding programs, and changing a culture. Because when you take over a program, now you went to Ashland, right? And
Yes.
I know you had a couple assistants assistant coach in Taunton before you went to Ashland,
Yeah.
and obviously getting back in the game and getting your feet wet and probably saying, hey, am I ready to jump back into this? Do I want to jump back into this? And so getting your feet wet and getting yourself back in the game was really important at the high school level. But let's talk about Ashland, because I want to ask you this question in two parts. One is, and I asked the same question last week to my guest, but I'm going to add a little bit of difference to it, okay? Is
Yep.
talk about when you take over a program, the first step it is to rebuild the program or take the program from where it currently is and kind of put your own signature on it. And then the second part of the question that I'm going to ask you is, and I haven't asked anybody this, so I'm very curious to your answer to this, is talk about trying to navigate seniors during a program takeover, because obviously someone's playing under somebody for a long time, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden at the end of their junior year, their coach is gone, somebody else is coming in new, and their minds go to, well, they're going to try to rebuild this program from scratch, or they're going to
Yeah.
do things their way and not care about us. So again, how do you go about assessing a program and taking it over, but also trying to balance the idea that you have seniors in there that have dedicated themselves to this program and making sure that they still feel a part of this rebuild?
Yeah. I think that's probably the most important thing, is to evaluate whether you fit somewhere or not, because your philosophy doesn't always work everywhere. But Ashland was very unique. they hadn't won in their male sports for a while, like not just basketball. And they had a principal, Jim Adams, who had been the athletic director there. And he became the principal, and he was going to change that culture. And he was outstanding. He's now been the superintendent of schools in Ashland for years. And how many times do you hear people in administration stay in the same place? Like, he's probably been there 20 years now.
Not
you know?
often. Not
So
often.
he totally committed to changing that culture. He also was an ex-basketball coach at UVM and Marlboro High School and stuff. So he liked sports a lot. He saw the value in sports and life lessons from sports. So the biggest thing that we had to do was to go in and say we weren't going to let the kids represent themselves in a negative way, which they were doing. Language, not just out of the mouth, but body language, just not respecting themselves. And again, it's not their fault. They're all good kids. They just, they had been allowed to act a certain way, and our goal was to change it. And that was made clear when I got hired. This is why we hired you. We hope you can do this. Very supportive. And I had a guy that came to coach with me, Steve Linehan, who I'd never met. And he was a youth sports guy, like I had been for a bunch of years. And they didn't have any freshman sports in Ashland either. So we started a freshman team, which was, I think we had 7 kids. They couldn't drop the ball in the ocean, but they came every day, worked their butts off. I don't think we ever won a game that year. They were fun, they were engaged, and Steve took them. He volunteered, he didn't get paid that year, he just wanted to coach. And he took them, and he's one of my favorite people after watching him do that year. But we changed the culture, and the seniors in that group, they were really good kids. Ashland's a nice little mixed blue and white collar town, and it was hard for them. They take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we tried to treat them respectfully but firm on behavior, and they were great. So we didn't have that much of a problem with them. It looked like it to other people, but everyone that had seen that group a year before or 2 years before, they could tell the difference.
They saw it. Yeah, they saw it.
Yeah, so if you and I only see someone once, that's our snapshot, right? Well, these kids, people have been watching them and picking on their behavior for years. So the younger kids always follow suit. They're excited about change, and their parents are excited about change. The seniors always want to dominate the environment because it's their turn.
It's their year.
That's one of the things about youth sports. They always play as their grade. When we're seniors, we're going to do this and that instead of when we're part of the team. So I thought we got through that year well. Got lucky the next year where we hit a shot, ended up 10-10 and made the tournament. Really did get lucky. And people started to believe in what we were trying to do. We got fully engaged in the youth group, and people in the youth group were awesome. And it just kind of, and then you get lucky. You might get a good group, right? A more talented group than someone else. We all, you can't coach to get someone to jump higher, except years of physical training. And the group that their senior year, they ended up 19-0 in the last game of the regular season. We lost, and we could have lost 10 of those games. They were all tight games, but these kids just were intelligent, IQ players, made shots, and we got lucky too, But it was
high IQ is in any sport. When a kid just has an IQ for the sport, it's like having an extra coach on the field for every kid that you have with the high IQ on the court.
And you get that on the playground. And since it's another youth sports issue, you don't get that. Like, you don't pick teams anymore, right? So you don't have to work your way up to not being the second to last kid. You want the older kids to pick you. Doesn't happen in youth sports anymore. So that was something that the IQ gets affected by. When you play against older kids in the summer and they're just bigger, stronger, even if they're not as good basketball players, a little more savvy and stuff, you learn how to play the game right, or you don't get on the court. So the IQs now, this group happened to come along. And matter of fact, at Holliston this year, my JV coach is one of my Ashland players. So it's been it was really a lot of fun. Our superintendent actually came in and talked to the kids before the tournament. We were the #1 ranked team in Central Mass. It was just very surreal to come in the gym I could walk in the gym 20 minutes later, they're already doing all their warm-up stuff, you know? So you want to empower the kids to believe it's their team. It's not my team. It's their team. It's their experience. So the more you can do that, I think the more they buy in, because if they think it's theirs, they want it successful.
And is that part of your program building? Like, I mean, obviously it's a year to year differently depending on the kids you have, but as far as building leadership, has that been a pretty consistent quality for you as far as how you go about assessing leaders and picking leaders for your program?
Yes, identify them. You know, everybody has different skill sets. And it's not a cliche about you can be a quiet leader or an aggressive leader. So, you try to feed into that. And kids that don't want to be leaders, that's fine too. But you have to identify some type of leadership. And the kids will follow because some don't want that responsibility, right? I mean, some want to run their own business, some don't as they get older. So it's when you walk in the gym, you could sit there at a good program. You could sit there and know who the leaders are at practice within 10 minutes.
And so this will lead me to something you brought up about your tenure at Ashland. I mean, you were 19-0. I've had two other guests on here, Kristen McDonald, who's now at Norwood.
Yeah, she's in our league.
Yeah, so there you go. So you see some great coaching, and Brian Fisher, who both went through undefeated seasons, navigated through undefeated seasons. So I guess I'll ask you the same sort of question. When did it start maybe becoming a reality that, man, we could run this table? And then maybe talk about the pressure behind it as a coach and how you navigate your team through those waters a little bit, because I'm sure they're hearing it, they're thinking it, they're seeing it, people are talking about it. So, how did you go about really navigating your team through that?
Well, I'd say there's no pressure from a coaching end, because you're always self-inflicted with your own pressure to succeed, right? So you can define that in many different ways. But when you walk in the gym and kids are happy to be there, life's pretty good. Yeah. So I don't think there's really pressure on the coach. You're going to coach the same way. You're going to make decisions not based on whether you're 3-3 or whether you're 6-0. You're hopefully making the decision, within the moment of what's needed at that time. So I don't think it's pressure. It shouldn't be, because is there anything wrong with being undefeated? I mean, I'd feel a lot more pressure, and I've had struggle years, so if I'm 0-6, that's a little more pressure, because your ego, you want it healthy and you want the kids to feel good about it, and winning does matter. It helps everything. So I just think the kids, if they embrace that opportunity to have, that's a new goal, right? So halfway through the season, they're 10-0 and they have this new goal. Can we run the table? So it's, maybe we can be a #1 seed. Well, you didn't think of that. I certainly didn't preseason. That's a fun reality to deal with during a season. It's really, I just think that may or may not happen again, but it is quite an experience to go through. And I've had teams that haven't won. The team that was 10-10 and made the shot, that was as enjoyable as the 19-1 team.
Yeah, and I just think, especially where you had such success. I mean, you talked about it when you first took over the program, building a culture, and that is changing what the players think about the program, what the student body thinks about the program, what the teachers, the administration, like you mentioned, the superintendent, it's changing a lot, the community. I mean, you're trying to change a lot of people's perception on this program. So when you have a season like that, that's successful and going on a run, I'm sure it got the attention of everybody in the community. I'm sure the youth was even involved.
Gym was packed. I mean, we had a night where we Skyped a game into a boy with leukemia in the Carolinas because he used to go to school in Ashland. Yeah. I mean, I still get goosebumps thinking of that now, what a positive experience it was, and we still talk about it. And I think when you're winning, those things, when you get more people in the gym and the energy, and you're just a part of the school mission. You're the basketball program, but you're following their lead. You know what I mean? We're not separate. And to Ashland's credit, the year after me, they hired Andrew McKay for football, who's an outstanding coach. They won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Matt Messer is the baseball coach. So they just continued it, and Jim Adams with his leadership, and those guys do a great job. They're still there coaching. Very, very
Yeah,
good.
I mean, I've scouted a ton of South Shore teams when I was in Arlington Catholic, especially the old playoff system where we knew those are some of the teams we might run into. And yeah, the atmosphere, like, I mean, I went and saw Abington, Mashpee, Ashland. I mean, there's a lot of teams we saw. So they do a great job. South Shore teams are tough to play. I always say they're just tough. They're tough
Rockland,
teams.
Abington, yes,
Yep,
I agree.
tough teams.
In all sports.
Yeah, in everything. And speaking of, obviously, we'll jump now into. I mean, I know obviously I'm skipping over your tenure at King Philip here a little bit, but I want to jump into Holliston because this is currently where your position's at right now. And again, I know Holliston football. There were times I scouted them and I was like, please, we do not want to see this team. Like it was a matchup nightmare to play those teams. So I'm sure there's athletes all over the school, but taking over, you took over, obviously, the year before, a really difficult time. And again, like you did in Ashland, navigating seniors through those waters, but then COVID kind of happens, right?
Yes.
And what I've gathered from COVID, from talking to a lot of coaches, is no matter what sport it is, every league was different. Everywhere in the state was different when they started. Some leagues started later than others. You could only play in league. So in practices, you couldn't practice as much, or, someone got it, then you couldn't practice for like X amount of days. Would it be fair to say that during COVID times, the more talented teams were just better in the game of basketball? Like the teams you played, like, did you just be like, wow, if teams are better, then they're just better? Like if they have better athletes, it's difficult to coach against that? Or did you feel like that's not necessarily true?
Well, I think that's part of it. For us, so Ashland was a week after us, but we were 4 or 5 weeks behind everyone else in our league. So we played Norwood our first 2 games, and they were in their 5th week, and we're in our first. So, and they're a good team. So they kind of have, a bunch of factors there. But I think, you have to rethink your approach, and you have to look through the kids' eyes more. They had a lot of stuff going on at home with different family members, and some kids didn't play because we were 4 weeks behind everyone. Those 4 weeks made some households more cynical about playing a sport and getting involved. And it was very surreal. We never had fans in our stands, not for one game. And it was very, very unique. A good thing was the cable stations put every single game on.
Yeah.
And that was a positive. So a lot of grandparents could see their, grandchildren play and stuff. So there were some positives. And Anthony actually have tried to learn to look more at those than to get swallowed up by the others, because it was very challenging. Yeah. The freshmen would go out one door and the JV group would come in the other door. Yeah. Then it'd be the same with the varsity. So it was very, very different. My athletic director was great. And the trainer's jobs now have changed so much with Triple E and concussion testing and now COVID. It is, what a different job that was than what they signed up for, right?
Oh,
but we
absolutely.
had really good leadership in those positions. It made it easier to coach, and the kids just wanted to play. So we competed very well as it went on, but we had a lot of catching up to do. So, we played less games and all that, but that's just a reality. Schools, each district had to make their decision based on what they thought was best. So we followed the leadership, and I thought the kids did a great job, and they worked very hard, but it was really different. So if you had more talent, you can win, because we didn't get those practice sessions to teach other things that might combat talent.
You're right.
More discipline, different structure. We didn't have a lot of practices, and you would have one team quarantine. Our JV group was out for a while because they had someone on another team had a positive test. So it was very unique. I give the leadership a lot of credit. I mean, we know that they weren't getting a lot of love notes.
Oh, of course not.
And coaches don't get a lot of those either a lot of times. So I think anyone in a position of leadership has to respect it. Even if you don't like decisions, someone has to make decisions. And
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, someone has to, like you said, they have to make that decision. And no matter what, it's not going to be popular, especially in that situation, especially with those scenarios, numbers, everything else. I mean, in any job, I mean,
yeah,
you have to make a decision on something that you have to put everybody's well-being. And I think at the end of the day, if you're in that position for, making decisions for people's well-being, 3 people getting sick or 3 people getting seriously ill is not acceptable. One
right.
isn't, you know what I mean? So if one
You're right.
isn't acceptable, then allowing a season isn't. So, those people, like you said, they're not getting love notes for that, but, they try to make the best
Yep.
decisions they can. Uh,
Yeah.
so my question to you, and kind of attaching it on to COVID, is talk about maybe the mental aspect of basketball a little bit. Like, your approach probably changed drastically, or maybe some things that you wouldn't have let slide before you maybe did. And I don't mean that from like a program perspective. I just mean that, like you mentioned, kids are at home, their situations are all different. They're in school
Yeah.
remotely. They might be suffering, mentally, from not
Yep.
seeing people or getting out of their house or feeling like they're trapped. I mean, there's also a lot. Basketball might have been the first time the kids got out of their house, like
You're right.
since
You're
that
right.
March.
No, you're right, Anthony. It's so you did have to change your thinking, and coaching now is so much more about psychology than it is just a game. And with COVID, that magnified it. They always had their mask on, so you didn't see the body language you might have got to see. They all came in from different households. Like you said, they weren't in school all the time, and they didn't even get that social interaction. And now we're telling them, sit 6 feet apart, you know, get your drink, and then come back on the court. And then you give them a break every X amount of minutes. And you're actually sometimes more concerned about that part of the gym time than you are about the basketball part. And being 4 or 5 weeks behind, we were forced to say, hey, let's not get overly excited here. And you're right in the way you say, I appreciate your sensitivity on letting it slide.
Yeah.
But that's a fair comment, because the fact is that you have to be more flexible. And what's fair is being flexible to what kids need. And one kid, you always treat them different, even though you want across the board certain things to be wrong or right. But every kid does get treated different, because that's fair. What do they need? And it was magnified during this time. This was their escape from a really challenging time. That hour, those 90 minutes in the gym. And that 90 minutes, I'm sitting there going, I throw out my practice plan most every day. And you just sit there and go, this is their time. It's not mine. Mine's easy. I go home, I can deal with myself. I always tell people I don't even like being with myself that much. So for those kids, they have siblings at home. Some kids didn't play because they have grandparents living with them. And they were worried when we didn't know what we know now about COVID.
Right. I
So
mean, that's the part too, right? Like, for X amount of months, no one really knew what to believe. I mean, there were days in my house that I would be like, what? I don't even know what's right and wrong. Like, you heard every extreme there possibly was. So
I
again, it
agree.
goes back to that decision making. Whoever has to make those decisions, they're basing decisions off of science saying one thing, politics saying another thing,
Yeah.
people having their own opinions, conspiracy theories. I mean, it was
Yep.
wild. It was wild. So
It still is. I mean, it's amazing now. I sit there and I try not to watch the news, because it's just your head starts spinning depending on who's talking. And I'd much rather talk to you about kids and sports
right.
than listen. I don't know anything about medicine. I mean, I only know what I've had to deal with. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
your illness is, and other than that, we're like trying to fix our car. We don't know what a muffler is till we have to fix it ourselves, So
Exactly.
I was glad other people were in charge of it. And my seniors this year, who were so looking forward to not being the culture change year, and then they had to deal with a different culture challenge, but they were great. And
That's
I can't say
awesome.
enough and their parents were wonderful. So
That's
even
even
that,
better.
it's hard. Oh no, they were great. They're all solid kids, and the apples don't fall far from the tree sometimes.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of jump away from like your coaching 10 years of places and just ask you more like basketball type way you think questions, your beliefs, so on and so forth. And one thing I love asking basketball coaches, because again, you hear me say a lot, I'm part of the football world and how we evaluate talent and how many kids we look on the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, and the value that they bring, whether it's, they're playing majority of the game or they're playing, certain amount of reps that they can help out in certain situations, is constructing your roster in basketball, right? When you look at your roster, I'm guessing 1 through 6, 1 through 7, maybe even 1 through 8. I'm not sure what you carry, but let's say, how do you figure out past like your number 8? Let's say you carry 12 people. How do you look at like closing off your bench 9 through 12 and saying, this is what I need to complete my roster as a whole team?
Yeah, well, I liked our conversation the other day when we were talking about Coach Poirier down at Situate, and I've seen a lot of people playing a lot more kids than they used to. I mean, Durfee High School for years, during great years, played 5, 6 kids the whole game. Every year, that was it. And they won a lot. So there's different ways to do it. And then you got to decide, well, why am I doing it that way? And can I do it differently and still be successful? So I think as we try to build up our program, I hope we have a problem that the 10th kid is pushing the number 2 kid. So for right now, we don't, but I would like the 10th, 11th, 12th kid to be the kids that are going to improve during the year and be the example of, the other kids that are more talented and start off the Monday after Thanksgiving dominating. At the high school age, these kids can improve and change because they're still physically changing too, and weight training, they change. And you've seen it coaching football. The sophomore you never thought could play, he grows into this body and he's a monster on the offensive line. Yeah, so it happens in basketball too. So I think you want to look at the potential of kids and how their attitudes are. Are they going to be sitting there, as a negative influence on the culture? Or are they going to, through communicating with the coaches, because you have to spend as much time with those kids because they deserve it, because that's fair, once again, that will they buy into improving and will they believe you that if you do A, B, and C, you're going to play more?
Yeah.
Because if you can play more, our best player gets to rest. And then he's better in the fourth quarter. So a lot of that is, again, you're always trying to get people to buy in, right? You do it at work. I do it with my business. And I think that's where the psychology of it comes in. But I just don't see many kids. If they're passionate, I think they can play in high school to some degree. So if they're passionate, that means they're going to work hard. They're going to work in the off season. They're going to be a good teammate.
I think it's a great answer. That's a great answer. And I think that's, the hardest thing I think as a coach sometimes is convincing kids that there is value in that and that there is value in sitting on the bench and learning. And there is value, maybe not getting as many minutes as you think you might deserve or you should get, because in a way you're also kind of not growing maybe on the court as a player, but you're mentally growing as a player. And mental toughness, valuable, as you know, is if you don't have mental toughness, your team's in trouble, period. I don't care what sport it is.
I always tell people that I wouldn't have been able to survive through my own life challenges if I didn't have what I learned from sports. And I can say that because it's been tested. So I know it's true. I don't say it as a cliche. I know I can go 2 days in a row without sleep if I have to. I know I can sacrifice myself for the better of the whole. All those things that I used to hear in a work ethic, no one can ever taught my work ethic. And I know that. That's what I can do to better my situation. So I can tell those kids, and I hope they do believe it because I mean it when I say it. And I think a lot of that too with the youth sports, one of the problems is we live in this instant gratification world where kids immediately think they should be playing because they've always been able to find a youth team, an AU or a club team, they get to play. They could be on the C team and play all the time, but now they're playing against better players and more grades. So it's, I think it's one of the fun things for me. As I got older, I realized the thing I like about my business, the thing I like about coaching is I like taking something and seeing it change and get better. So that I never realized that till I was in my 40s. I did it for other reasons. You love the game, you want to coach, it's all exciting. You're going to imitate Bobby Knight, and all this stuff, right?
Throwing shares. Yeah. Oh,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't pick it up. So, but there's all these things that then you do differently, and you sit there and you go, "Oh my God, I can't believe I thought that way back then."
Crazy.
So now you look at the kid, you put your arm around him, you don't let him leave the gym until you know he's straight. Um, even COVID with that, we couldn't talk to the kids. So they left after 90 minutes. We weren't in a meeting. You could do a Zoom thing, but that's totally different. And when you sit one-on-one with a kid, that's when you get to know them.
Right. Eye
How,
contact, conversation, everything. Oh yeah,
yeah,
100%.
yeah.
So you mentioned something, and this is a perfect way to kind of ask you this question. What is your feeling about high school athletes when it comes to sports? Are you, for basketball, saying that kids should be focusing on playing basketball year round, playing AAU? Are you looking more for the kids to be well-rounded athletes and play different sports for their high school and represent them? Or are you kind of somewhere in the middle when it comes to that?
Well, so as someone that's like even now in a place where we're building a program, so the best athletes haven't been playing basketball. Holliston football coach Kylie does a great job. They're very successful. He'll be the first to tell you he built that up. And Holliston always had good football, but there were down years, and Coach Kylie did build that up. So you need to get more athletes engaged in your sport. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, play more of this and don't play that as much. Don't spend 2 hours lifting when you could do shooting in the gym. So you really owe it to the kid to kind of support him and what does he want to do. And I have a kid this year who's playing 3 sports. He's going to be good at all 3. And his passion might be one of the other sports than basketball. He'll be a very good basketball player. He's bright, he's intelligent, he works hard. So every study says play multiple sports. Every single study, it's good mentally, it's good physically, different muscles. So you hope everybody is on that page, but I don't think everyone is, but you hope they are. And again, you can't spend time complaining about something. You want to do the best you can, like you used the phrase as well. Have that kid find the value in doing this for him, and the parents to feel that it's good. Because if the parents think their 5-year-old boy should be an NBA basketball player, well, they're going to have him playing basketball all the time. And we know how many NBA basketball players come out, every year, right? Not many not from Holliston, anyways. And so here we are trying to get the kids, to reel them in and say, no, play multiple sports, play with your friends. And I think that's a challenge, especially when we're at the bottom. Now we're trying to build our program.
Yeah.
So we want those good athletes that are playing football. If they like playing basketball, we want them, we welcome them. And so we're not going to turn around and say, well, don't play lacrosse in the spring.
Right.
We're going to support them in doing that to be consistent.
There's nothing worse than when a kid tells you, well, my hockey coach or my basketball coach or my baseball coach doesn't want me playing football. It's like,
Right.
I would never tell those kids not to play another sport, right? Because
No.
I come from the world of, if a kid's a freshman and sophomore in high school, and let's say there is a Division 1-2 school or Division 2 school that approaches them that early, okay,
Yep.
maybe then you focus on that sport and you really get
Yeah.
better at that. But for the most part, like playing multiple sports, you're using different muscle groups, you're building leadership skills, you're learning how to be a good teammate, you're putting yourself into mentally tough situations. You're not doing that just playing the same sport all the time. You're not being a good teammate and learning how to navigate tough waters by just playing the same thing all the time. Like, I get it both ways, but I just feel as though if you're going to develop as a young teenager, you're growing, your thoughts are always changing as a person, not even in sports. In sports, the same thing has happened. You need that same development. You need that same growth. You wouldn't just I like math, and I'm not just going to take one math class because math's the only thing I'm really good at. So forget about English and social studies and science. Like, I'm just going to focus on math. Like, no, you learn other subjects just like you learn how to put yourself in other situations in sports. So,
and it's very nice to be the best at one sport, and usually someone else is better at the other. And it's nice to be in the back seat once in a while,
Right.
like to appreciate that person's skill sets and how they got there. And I think athletes, especially high school kids, do. Kids know. They know who's the better player. They already got it figured out, while you and I are trying to figure out where they fit into what we're trying to do, right?
Right.
But they usually know, especially in basketball, it's 5 people. Football is much more complicated on getting the sum of your parts. But in basketball, you can tell people's skill sets pretty quickly. Now, how they improve and how they change is on their work ethic and so on. But if you're a good athlete, and athletes love playing basketball, they'll play multiple sports. And it's all the football. We used to have an open gym, and it was all Patriots players and guys like that playing. They all love playing basketball because they could show off their athletic abilities.
Yeah.
So I think the good athletes want to play multiple sports, and they should. It's good for them. They're only an injury away from not playing anything. I know that sounds horrible, but you and I both know examples of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be the one that told the kid not to play football, and then he missed out on that opportunity. I'm not going to be that guy. That's his parents' decision, and I'll support him on what he wants to do.
Very cool. I agree. I stand right by you on that. And, one thing I want to bring up to our pre-phone conversation that we had a little bit the other night was something that's really cool, because you're the second coach that I've had on here that has told me this from the podcast. And I look at this podcast as such like a professional development for coaches out there to be able to listen to this and hear how other coaches, run their programs and what they believe in and how they schedule non-league opponents and all sorts of questions that I could talk to you for another 2 or 3 hours about this. Right. But one really cool thing that I found awesome was that when we talked, you said to me that you listened to this podcast and that you were a big fan of it. And that after listening to a few of them, specifically episode with Somerville head boys basketball coach Mark Antonelli, you guys are now playing each other this season and like in a home and a home against each other, and you connected as a result of this podcast. So I just wanted to throw it out there because I think that that's really cool to hear that you guys are now playing each other in a game, and I'm able to help connect programs from one side of the state to the other. And I just wanted to maybe see if you could explain that a little bit more and how you went about doing that.
Yeah, so Mark and I had met, I don't know how originally we connected, but he played in one of our tournaments in Ashland because we wanted to bring a different style team in. And so we got to meet him, and I liked him a lot. Didn't cross paths with him a lot, different leagues and so on, different ages. He's just 2 years younger than me, I think. So, but then I saw him, my son's team, Bridgewater Raynham, played his team. And I was sitting in the bleachers, and he's coming out at halftime, and I said hi. He's kind of looking at me, trying to figure it out. And then I talked to him after, and he went out of his way to be nice to my son. So I said, he's what I thought he was. This guy's a good guy. So then I was following him on his Twitter, and I saw your group, and then I paid attention and watched that podcast. And then we were going to play this year or last year, but COVID beat up the schedules. So we're trying to play again this year. And everything's about relationships. I don't care what you do, or, you lose your friends. At my age, we're losing our friends all the time, right? So it's all about relationships and memories. And he's one of the really good guys. And when I listen to him talk on your podcast, you can see the passion. I know Coach Poirier, not well on a personal level, but I like watching his team play. So I listen to him, and I'm like, he's got a better way of saying that than I do. I should rethink that. He does certain things on the court that other people are starting to copy. It's very interesting. And by all accounts, he's a real good guy. And I'm watching him going, no, I'm going to pay attention to this. So, and I don't care what sport it is. So football is a different sport, but it's philosophically, they're dealing with the same issues. And so I can watch anyone talk about kids and philosophy. I don't want them to tell me what offense to run so much, but I like hearing them talk about kids and the way they do things. I find it fascinating. Because your X's and O are based on your personnel, so you have to figure that out. But the rest of it, it's across the board.
Yeah. And like I said, I love this is like it being like a professional development for so many coaches because really, I mean, like you said, you listen to a few different guys and how they say things or word things and saying, you know what, I got to approach this differently. Or, sports is a copycat thing in general. You see something
Yeah.
working for somebody really well. I'm not going to reinvent it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to implement it, maybe add my
Yeah.
own little flavor to it. But, for the most part, yeah, I'm using something that's really successful. So,
Goes in
um,
cycles too.
it does. And it does. And
Yeah.
like you said, it all is predecessed on talent from jump, right? Because it doesn't
Yeah.
matter how much you know and everything else. It's what you have and what you can do with what you have, right?
Well, if
So,
you build your program enough, and I'll use Mansfield as an example, a great program, very good coach. He took him a while, he built it up. It's good all the time now because he does that system and he gets the kids, he plugs them in.
yeah.
And he play, and same with Newton North. Paul Conley does a great job over there. And he plugs kids in, different styles, but the youth groups, they know those kids are going, I can play that spot. I want to play like him. And that's what I hope to get at Holliston. Have the younger kids want to be like, I want to be like Anthony. I like the way he plays. That's the guy I want to emulate. My skill set can do that, as opposed to, everyone wants to be Michael Jordan. I don't think anyone's got there.
Yeah, and nobody ever will, right?
No, no.
So and I think that's cool, like you said, in Holliston too, especially when you're going to start building that success. And we know you will. We know you will. Having those youth kids at the game to be like, I want to be like number 6, I want to be like number
Yep.
10, I want to be like number 25, and that's those kids remember that, and then they come through the program, and you're there as coach, and they remember seeing all that stuff, and I love all that. I think that stuff's great. So
I remember my son going to a King Philip High School game because we lived out, and Jake Lehman was playing, and Jake's in the NBA now.
yeah.
And him coming home all excited. I didn't go to the game, and I could care less if Jake's a good guy. I don't care if he's an NBA player, if he plays in high school. Turns out he plays in the NBA. So to see how many kids got turned on by wanting to watch that,
Yeah.
he just had to, because he's a good person. The parents are happy. Some guys, you worry about what's being said around your kids, right? But high school sports can turn on younger kids to spend their time in a better place than some of the other options. And that's kind of our responsibility as high school coaches, to give a product that young kids admire, and therefore that'll be a good option. Their parents will be happy about that option.
Very well said, Coach. Very well said. And we look to continue following. Hey, listen, I got my dog barking upstairs. It must be something in the air because my dog parked like 25 seconds before your dog did. So that's too funny.
Maybe it's your dog's fault.
I mean, dogs can hear all sorts of things, so probably.
Yeah.
With that being said, we can't wait to follow the success that you're going to have in the future and follow Holliston High School basketball. And we're going to jump into our last segment here, which is called our 2-minute drill. Now, we have a part of our announcers. One of the announcers that we're making tonight is that our 2-minute drill is going to be officially called our 2-minute drill, sponsored by Cheney's. Now, Cheney's is one of our first sponsors we've ever had on this show. They've been very loyal to us, and we've gone down there. We've cut commercials. The owner, Joe Spagnuolo, has been great, and someone who's really supported this podcast from when it was just on Twitter and YouTube and had very minimal followers. So, he's very loyal to us. We're very loyal to him. We're appreciative of him, and we're going to be naming our 2-minute drill the Cheney's 2-minute drill. So you're the first one, and it's going to be a little different. I'm going to ask a little bit of different questions, but you've seen the show before. You know how it works. Rapid fire questions. I'm just going to shoot at you 1 or 2 word answers. I do get a challenge flag if I want you to explain something more, and vice versa. I allow you to explain something more if you choose to do so as well.
Football guys always have flags.
Hey, listen, we're always ready to throw something, right? So in honor, I'll start it off. And in the first question, in honor of our sponsor for the 2-minute drill, Cheney's, if you had the ability to have an artichini rice ball, what would be the ideal stuffing that you would put inside of it?
So I would reverse the old, and I might be saying this wrong. I'll apologize to our Polish friends. The old gołąbkis, where it was the cabbage on the outside and the rice and things on the inside. I would reverse that and put the cabbage on the inside with a type of meat in it. And I used to love those. When I went to SMU, we'd go to Fall River and, a lot of different ethnic things. And I think I could munch away on those a lot. Of course, I would have trouble saying when to stop, but You don't see those ethnic things anymore as much, or at least not where I live. And
Yeah.
I miss that.
I love the answer. I think that's a great answer. Joe's going to
Put
hear
some
all these
chorizo,
answers.
put some chorizo in the middle, give it a little spicy sausage in there, be all set to go.
I love it. I love it. Second question. After a big game on a Friday night, you've coached at a lot of different places. What's the best hot spot you went to after a game? Where was it located and what was the name of it?
Well, the best one for me was, and I was younger then, so I was out after games, was Julio's in Bridgewater, where they had the stuffed pizza. It was almost like a calzone, and it did make you probably have to wash it down with a couple things during the course of the game after. But it was right in a campus field with dartboards in there, and I just think that was always the nicest place to go. And when you jump around from one place to the other a little bit over the last couple of years, sometimes with high school sports now, you don't really want to go in town. You don't want to run into all the, it can be kind of, you want to be separate with your coaches. So you want to find that place where you and your coaches can go and talk and not feel like you're engaged in conversations you don't want to be. Was that said diplomatically?
Yeah, it's very well said. And it's some of the best coaching that happens. Let's be real. You go to a place after a game, you're discussing that game, the win, the loss, whatever it was, and how to regroup and prepare for your next opponent with minimal amount of days of practice ahead of you. So I love the answer. Toughest team at Bridgewater State that you've ever had a prep for, like a team that you just like dreaded playing every year?
Salem State, because back then Salem State would have kids come in January, and we weren't ready for that. And one time we went to play up at Salem. We had a good team that year, and two guys were in the gym at Salem warming up. And I'm like, shit, that 6'7" guy looks familiar. It was a guy, Bobby Francis, that had played at Cambridge Ridge, and he transferred from BC to Salem State for January. So that was bad because he shot 11 for 12. But then Chris Green, who was a East Boston guy, he transferred from Marist. He came home to take care of his siblings. Chris is a great guy, and we still give him a hard time about it. And he played with them. So they got a point guard who was a Division I player and a D1 player from BC. And we're sitting there looking up at him like we were so unprepared. We didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So they were always good. Jimmy Todd was the coach there. He was a great guy and a great coach. So it was always fun playing them, but always a surprise, and never one that would work in our favor too
much. Would you consider your style more offensive or defensive?
I would say defensively. I'm trying to, because kids with youth sports now, they're not taught a lot of defense fundamentally. And to be honest with you, a lot of the coaches come from AAU now. And so they don't have the same background. Like we always had to be an assistant for a while, which was great. And you really learned, and you went to a lot of clinics and you learned the game. So I would probably be more defensive. And I think last year it helped us a lot because we didn't get the skill work that we would normally in the gym during the course of the off season.
Okay. One word you would use to describe your coaching style on the sideline.
Now or years ago?
We'll say now.
Okay. I think now I'm more reflective on the decisions I make. So I would say it's more reflective now. Whenever I make a decision, I try to think about it on the spot. I try to prepare more looking through the kids' eyes than I did when I was younger. Feeling that I can control my kids' preparation much more than through a scouting report on other people. So I think that's something I've changed a lot more now, where I try to reflect more on where my kids are at mentally and how can they, especially in this infancy time right now that we've kind of just had a couple walls put in front of us with COVID, with youth groups and stuff. And I think it was very healthy for me to go through that last year, although I wish none of our kids got to. For me, I learned a lot about coaching, talking with other coaches about how they were handling COVID and how the kids were, and actually met a lot of coaches that I really like. Ryan Gordy from Canton, who I ended up watching all the time. I follow him on Twitter, another one of those examples about watching other coaches. I find the way he does things and says things is outstanding.
Yeah.
I think he's stepping down to be an administrator from Canton, but just there's so many people out there that you can really connect with and change as you get older. Because I look at life totally different now than I did.
It's true. It is true. It's constantly evolving for sure. Last
Yeah.
question. I've been asking this for weeks. I'll ask you, even though you're a basketball guy, I'm going to ask you a football question. Week 4 in the NFL, Belichick versus Brady. Who's winning that game?
I think Belichick wins. I think my hope is that he turns to the young quarterback and that he gets a couple games under his belt before the 4th game. That's my only concern. But I think defensively, they're a lot better just with COVID out. And I think they've added a lot of pieces that he's a good enough coach. They weren't as bad as people thought last year. There were parts of their game that were bad, but I don't think they were that far away.
No, I think
I'm going with Belichick because it makes me feel better.
That's great, Coach. Great answer. You're actually one of the first people to say Belichick, which is kind of crazy. But that's a 2-minute drill. You survived it, Coach. And again, I just want to say thank you for coming on. It was an honor. I talked to you on the phone the other day. We've never, talked or met each other before, and I felt like having a conversation with you. I've known you for a really long time, so it was nice to continue that today. And I wish you nothing but the best success in the future. And I think you will be turning that program around fairly quick at Holliston. I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to following the stuff that you do because I see a very positive influence on sports. It makes people maybe think twice about what they're doing, which is good, and certainly helps me do that. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you.
Of course. Like I said, we were lucky. So, we'll keep in touch for sure. And, from Beyond Podcast, I'm your host, Anthony Petrellis. Till next time. Thank you so much.